So, Christopher, we had a conversation about my experience of one of the biggest drivers today that motivates parents in doing things is this feeling of guilt that they're not providing their children with the best that they possibly can, or the guilt that they might be negatively impacting their children, and later on the children are going to be hampered or kept back somehow psychologically, emotionally, in some way for their actions, whether they were aware of that or not. In other words, the ignorance is bliss scenario. So let's say that a parent gets to the point of saying, okay, so I experience that I'm wanting to do something different, or something's not working for me, and I feel perhaps guilty that I don't know what to do or how to manage that. So what would you suggest, or what is your insights into when a parent says, well, I need to do something different, but I don't know what?
Out of your introduction, I think the very first thing that all of us need to accept as parents, that whatever you do is going to profoundly impact your child's life. The implications behind that is that until the age of 7 or thereabouts, a child is deeply impressionable. And I think that's probably not too many people are going to argue that point. So therefore, in a very literal sense, reductio ad absurdum, if you pick your nose, that is going to make an impression on the child. Accept. Now, can you therefore now encase your child in some sort of glass bubble that it is now going to be totally cut off from the world? I suppose you could. But can you imagine anything more awful? That you would actually take your child and encase it in what I'm calling a glass bubble or something, so that it was now not subject to any bad influence and therefore any good influence. Not possible. This, of course, is basic quantum physics, is that the experiment that is taking place is directly impacted by the observer. The observer has a direct and very profound effect on the experiment. So now get on with it. All that you can attempt to be as a parent is to be the very best that you can possibly be. Will you make mistakes? I hope so. We just talked about perfection in the last section. So will you do it wrong from time to time? I hope so. Will you absolutely mess it up from time to time so that your child is reeling from the shock? I hope so, because it's in that our humanity lies. And it is only if we can steel our children to cope with those shocks, those blows, by allowing them to see how we cope with the shocks and blows that we are also subject to, that we can allow them to grow up into good human beings.
So it's kind of like that saying, happiness is not the absence of problems, but our ability to deal with them, right?
Precisely.
So in that scenario, then we're acknowledging that as parents, we're going to be making mistakes, we're going to be impacting them, and that actually provides an opportunity for children to see, well, how do we deal with having made those kind of mistakes and having made those impacts? Because that itself is a skill set, as you said, which will steel them or prepare them for their kind of future engagement with the world, which actually is far more realistic than trying to cocoon or bubble them.
Precisely. And then guilt. And we all feel guilty. I mean, if anybody out there thinks that I don't feel guilty about what I do from time to time, as I say, catch a wake up. I do. However, I'm also very aware that it is probably the most futile and the most pointless of emotions. So when it comes up, I do my very best to engage it and look at it and ask myself the great question of the universe: why? What am I actually feeling guilty about here? The next question is, did I do the best that I possibly could under the circumstances that I was confronted with? If the answer to that question is no, I did not do the best, good, then there's a lesson to be learnt. And thank goodness for that. And what's the point of guilt in that? And if I did do the very best that I could under the particular circumstances that I was confronted with, well, then I can't do any better, so what's the point of guilt? It is truly a pointless emotion. Sadly, what we have been brought up with these days from our social conditioning and it is a remarkably effective weapon, is being beaten by the stick of guilt. And it works. It works. We can get people to do the most remarkable things if we beat them with the stick of guilt. It makes a taser or a cattle prod look like a child's toy. It's incredible.
So as parents, most of our traditional parenting techniques rely on making the child feel guilty, which therefore drives them to change behavior, right? But that's something which we don't necessarily want in our children, is to laden them with the sense of guilt.
Well, hopefully not. They'll develop it on their own quick enough. They will. Are we going to get rid of this overnight? Not a chance. How long will it take? I don't know. Maybe never. Maybe we'll never get rid of it. Maybe it is also part and parcel of the whole package of being human, and it is one of the things that is put out there for us to deal with so that we can actually experience just how magnificent we are. It's one of those challenges that are given us.
So one way of perhaps looking at it is, if you're feeling guilty, like you've said, you kind of ask the reason why, you look to see an understanding, and then doing something about that if you feel that it is something that would make you feel better about who you are and what you're doing. And in that, how would a parent measure if what they're doing is actually taking them closer to where they want to go?
The results. Are you getting the results that you want? Are you getting the results that you want, both in yourself and in the child? Because if you use the stick of guilt on the child, you will get a behavioral result. You will get the child to behave in a certain way that might be more comfortable for you. But my goodness me, in my experience, and I have a lot of experience, it's going to sooner or later come back and bite you.
So that's what I refer to as your short-term result and your long-term result. And your short-term result, that skill technique, which is a technique of making a child feel guilty, will get them to shift their behavior, but only for a short amount of time.
Precisely.
But what's underlying there on a long timeline or framework is it's probably going to surface later, either through low self-esteem or resentment or being totally demoralized and depressed. And then what you were doing right at the beginning is having a long-term impact. And then we have to start questioning, well, actually, what we were doing back then isn't giving us both the short-term and the long-term results. And that means we would need to look to do something differently.
That's precisely what I was talking about a little bit earlier when I said we are sowing a whirlwind, which we are now beginning to reap.